Okay, let's moving on to objective number 4, describe lean operations. Lean thinking, this is a management philosophy and strategy focused on creating value for the customer by eliminating waste. I guess I would suggest to you that lean thinking is a relatively new concept. I know that even when I was in college in the 80s and 90s, that was like when it was first introduced, lean thinking. So, we've been using it, and the reason being is that we were getting our butts kicked for years in manufacturing, and the best example I can give you is in the auto industry. In the 40s, 50s, and even into the early 60s, U.S. products were always considered to be the best. And then about the 70s, that wasn't the case anymore. And then 70s and into the 80s, our products were not perceived to be as good as others outside the United States. So the Southeast Asia countries were coming up with much better product. The example would be Japanese vehicles were smaller, more fuel efficient, would last longer. And so they had adopted this lean thinking philosophy, and it wasn't until about the 80s and 90s that we came on board with that. Lean thinking has become the dominant business paradigm, and then lean thinking is the emphasis on short customer response time. So we want to be real responsive to the customer needs. All right, there are 8 wastes of traditional operations, things that we want to minimize in all cases and focus in on being much more efficient. Defects. If you produce defects, you've wasted time and money. You produce something that's going to be thrown away, that's not cool. So find ways of reducing defects. Overproduction. Put a lot of product in an inventory and it sits for a long period of time, you've wasted time, money, everything. Waiting time. If you have a situation in your production run where people are waiting for things to get to the next stage, maybe we need to redesign the production process. Not utilizing people to their full potential. Transportation, inventory, movement, excess processing. All of these will result in what we refer to as downtime. Downtime is not good in manufacturing. Time is everything. We want to move, keep things moving, keep production running. All right, so characteristics of lean operations, the first bullet point, eliminating the waste of time and money that accompanies large inventories. Just-in-time inventory, JIT, was introduced first by the Japanese, and then it was adopted by American companies, and even ended up being adopted by retailers. JIT focuses on purchasing raw materials just in time for production and complete goods just in time for delivery. JIT. Value streaming mapping, we're going to look and see where we're going to look at the entire production process and identify specifically which areas are adding value and which ones are not. Production occurs in self-contained cells. It used to be that we would start manufacturing process at one area, and then production would continue more like a process. Everything was run into stream. And then you'd have a QC department at the end, and they would kick everything out. Well, there was a problem with that, because if your production started in department 1 and you kept adding, and if the error occurred in production 1, and you kept adding more stuff on top of that error, and you ended up kicking it out at the end of the process, well, all the money that you added to the product from after department 1 or process 1, all that money was a complete and utter waste. It was going to get kicked out to begin with because of a problem on the front end, and you just kept adding and adding and adding. So looking at self-contained cells means that every process really does everything. It produces it, it reviews it, it controls its value, its design, and it also controls its quality. It becomes responsible for its own quality so that it can't leave that cell that production process until it passes an inspection. That was a relatively new concept, imagine that, in the 70s and 80s. Employee empowerment, broad roles and use of teams. So we're looking at ways of getting the employees more involved with the production process, finding ways for departments to work together to achieve specific goals. That's the use of teams. So employee empowerment, get people working together. And then there are a ton of acronyms out there to help managers to convey the priorities of a company. Here is an example of the 5S, workplace organization. What are the 5 S's? Sort, set in order, shine, standardize, and sustain. Continuing on with characteristics of lean operations. When you're looking at a lean operation, you're going to see more continuous flow. Things don't stop and start here, start and stop here. They flow through the entire process. You have more of a pull system where the end pulls or is prompting for more processes to come at it. So the pull system makes it for more efficient rather than pushing it where things get stuck. The pull system brings the production through, brings the product so that it moves quicker. Shorter manufacturing cycle times, smaller batches, reduced setup times, point of use storage, emphasis on quality, supply chain management, and backflush costing. All these items are identified as characteristics of lean operations. Now, there are some drawbacks to lean production. When you use lean production, you become vulnerable when problems strike suppliers or distributors. One of the things that we talked about under characteristics is supply chain management. What does that mean? That means that we're going to there used to be a thought process that, well, I'm going to look at suppliers and I'm going to have 5 or 6 different suppliers set up so that if one goes down, I can quickly move to another. And what that did is it created less loyalty, less commitment, and now, everybody's just functioning on their own. Well, let's say we find 1 or 2 very good suppliers and we commit and we work with them specifically to try to get better. Okay, you work with them, you look to be more efficient with them, you try to work pricing so that it works for everybody involved. But and so you build a real strong relationship with that supplier. But what does that do? If something goes wrong with that supplier, then now you're more vulnerable because you've just made a commitment to that 1 supplier. Or maybe 2. You're not going to probably commit completely to just 1. But you're going to limit the number of options. You're not going to be sitting there and trying to bid out everything so that you have 10 people bidding on every job. You're going to look at committing yourself to just a few suppliers and using them as a way to gain a competitive advantage. So what are some of the problems? Well, you could have delivery days if they get backed up, weather-related issues if one supplier is just down in an area where they're having bad weather. If they have strikes, you're going to be vulnerable and shortage of parts and recalls. So all of those things you need to be taken into consideration when we're talking. There are some drawbacks to lean production. That's the point. However, the thought process is that even though there's more risk associated with it, if you build a really strong relationship with suppliers, you'll, in the end up being in a better situation. Okay, so to introduce sustainability and lean thinking together, sustainability, again, we're talking about the longer term, the global aspect of sustainability. We want to find ways to reduce waste. That's going to help you as a company, but it's also going to help to minimize waste. And if we reduce waste from a global perspective, that could be a good thing. Lean operations increase economic profits. That's always good for everyone. And it focuses on internal waste. So what are we going to do to find ways of minimizing the internal waste? Sustainability to increase profits will preserve the planet and improve lives. So focus on both internal and external. That's what we're looking for when it comes to sustainability.